welcome to Office Hours, the podcast where we answer the business questions you're too afraid to ask. I'm Cari Street, a student and staff member here at King's College London, and in each episode I'm going to sit down with experts to break down a complex concept in a simple and relevant way. Today I'm joined by Dr. Filipa Sá, a leading expert on the housing market here at King's, as well as property expert and award-winning presenter Tayo Oguntonade, to answer a question that is on many minds of young people in the UK. Why can't I afford a house? My office hour appointment is booked, so let's dive in. So today we're looking at this issue of housing costs, housing markets, and I think for young people, it's on a lot of people's minds, especially graduates and first-time house buyers, and are looking at renting, are looking at buying eventually and hopefully. So I want to go to Filipa on this one first. What has your research shown about the issues in the housing market for young people? Why can't we afford a house? I know it's not an easy question to answer, but what is your first initial response to that question?
So it's a combination of factors. So you would look at factors on the demand side. So that would be the demand for housing. Are there more people looking for homes? That's where foreign investment, which is one of the topics I've looked at, plays a role. And then we have the supply side as well. Are we building enough homes to meet the demand? It really is a combination of both factors. In my research, I've focused mostly on demand shocks. I have some work on immigration and more recently some work on foreign investment. The demand side will interact with the supply side. So if we have an increase in demand that is met by an equal increase in supply, we shouldn't see an increase in prices. But what happens is we have an increase in demand and the supply of housing remains. So we see an increase in prices.
And how has that changed over the past few decades? Why does this seem to be such an issue, especially facing young people today?
So prices have increased quite dramatically across the UK, not just in London, but in other regions as well in the past 20 years or so. It's a combination of these two factors. We have had an increase in the demand for housing because we have an increase in immigration and there's also an increase in foreign investment. And at the same time, we don't see an increase in housing supply of a large enough magnitude that would mitigate the effects on prices. So, in a simple economics model, if you have an increase in demand and supply is not elastic, this will be translating into an increase in prices.
And do you have any on-the-ground perspective of this? You speak to people who are looking at home buying every day. This is your business. What are you seeing from people? What are people's initial responses to this?
Yeah, I think that just to double down on what Filipa mentioned, people on the ground are noticing it as well. They're noticing it, but it's on a very, as you mentioned, on the ground way. We know that demand is high because when people go for house viewings, once upon a time, you might be viewing a house with 3 people. In certain cases, for a property that's well priced, there might be 16 people, 20 people on the same viewing. So they're literally seeing the effects of what Filipa mentioned. Then also when it comes to policy, you'll find that when the government has targets to build, they fall short every single year. So supply targets aren't being met. So like Filipa mentioned, increased demand and low supply means that prices are increasing. Now, how people are typically feeling about it at the moment, they are feeling the effects because they're seeing that not only the salary that I've got today, even if I got the average salary or above the average salary in the UK, I may still struggle to buy a home. And that's becoming very concerning for young people, particularly in the UK, because they would have just graduated, got their first job. And it's like the salary that they're aspiring to, even when they get that salary, can they even buy a home? And it's something that's very concerning at the moment.
Absolutely. I'm someone in the early 20s. I'm in this pool of people, and it's such a buzz in the media at the minute. You often hear misconceptions about why young people can't afford to buy a home, and the emphasis is placed on the individual, on young people buying too many coffees, watching too many streaming services. Why do you think this individualized narrative is being put across? What do you think the real issue is?
I think that it's often put on the individual because generally as humans, we have the inability to put our own experiences to one side and consider someone else's experiences. The reason why I say that is 40, 50, 60 years ago, there were a lot of challenges at that point, maybe a lack of jobs or wars. But when it comes to housing in particular, the point is that if you had a job on the average salary, it was less strenuous to buy a home. Interest rates may have been higher, but that's not what we're talking about. We're simply saying that your home might have been 3 times what your annual salary was in some places. Now, for young people in major cities in particular, today, those numbers are way higher. It can span from 6 times to 7 times, sometimes over 10 times. And it's really difficult. I made a video on my social media platforms trying to break down exactly what you just mentioned, Carrie. I was speaking to the young people today. It was called, It's Not You, It's London, because it's a property market issue, not a personal issue. I often remind people that in the UK, people don't earn massively different from each other. It's not like New York where someone earns 30K and they're walking down the street next to someone that earns 3 million a year. You don't get that quite a lot in the UK, right? Because the salaries don't differ wildly, people's affordability doesn't differ wildly. And you'll find that a lot of people are in a bucket whereby they are struggling to buy a home because wages haven't kept up with house prices. And that's due to the demand and supply.
In some parts of the country, the average house prices are 10 times the average salary. So it's really difficult to save enough to pay a deposit on a house. You end up renting, then all your income goes into rent and living expenses, and you have a very small chance of saving enough for a home. It's really difficult to make that step into the property ladder. Once you get in there, it's easier because you have capital appreciation. Once you have enough money to pay a deposit and get your first home, even if it's a small flat, you would expect good capital appreciation over time. And it's probably the best investment you can make. And then you can sell a bit 5-10 years down the line and then buy somewhere bigger. But it's getting into the property ladder that is getting more difficult.
Absolutely. On your research, you look a lot about foreign investment in the UK. A lot of people have foreign landlords, people who don't live in the country, who own the house that you live in. You maybe have never seen them, but you live in their house. Why is there such foreign investment in the UK? And are there any incentives or repercussions for people who own multiple properties that are foreign landlords?
I think the reason why investors are attracted to the UK is because of the capital appreciation that we have seen in the past 20 years. Investing in UK property, it's a safe asset, and it's an asset that guarantees a good rate of return. Foreign investors invest here because it's a safe haven. It's a safe place to invest, and the return is attractive. In my research, I exploit some exogenous variation in foreign investment coming from political conditions abroad. If you have negative shocks in your home country, let's say Russia, now there are restrictions, but before the invasion of Ukraine, there weren't. And if you have an environment where there is political instability or economic instability, you would direct your money to the UK. Countries like Greece and the sovereign debt crisis or political conflict or wars. So there are factors happening in the rest of the world that make investors direct money to the UK because it's a safe investment with a good rate of return. And until recently, we didn't tax these investments. So investors could just buy property and there was no restriction. Now there is a 2% stamp duty surcharge for foreign buyers. And I'm very happy to say that my research supported the introduction of this tax. It was really good to see that policy impact of the research. In 2020, I was presenting my work at Treasury just before Treasury introduced this stamp duty surcharge into the budget. I haven't done a policy evaluation of the stamp duty surcharge, so I don't know if it has discouraged foreign buyers or not. I think at a value of 2% is probably not large enough to have a discouragement effect because most of these buyers, probably a 2% surcharge is not really binding for them. They are cash-rich buyers, and 2% more the cost of the property probably is not significant. But it does help raise funds for the government. The idea was to use these funds to tackle homelessness. It would be interesting to see if the policy had any effect on foreign investment and on homelessness. For many years, there was no disincentive. There was no stamp duty surcharge, so foreign investors were completely free to invest in the UK.
That's super interesting. And I'm going to ask a really silly question now, and this might lead us well into the next section. What is a stamp duty surcharge?
When you buy a home, you have to pay the stamp duty tax. What the surcharge does, The reason why it's called a surcharge is put on top of the normal rates. So a foreign buyer would have to pay stamp duty tax at the same rates as a domestic buyer plus 2%.
I think let's move into our no silly questions section now. These are questions that we've had written in from our Instagram stories. So either of you, Tayo or Filipa, feel free to answer these if any of them take your fancy. So the first one, and this might be one for you, Tayo, is what actually is a credit score? Why does it matter? And how can I improve mine as a student?
Great questions. I think that I'm happy to answer this question because I wish someone had these answers for me when I was a student. A credit score is effectively a financial CV. It's a record of your borrowing and how well you pay back your borrowing. The mortgage lenders have access to these records and they use these records to make a lending decision. So there's two things that you need to focus on: your actual credit score and your actual credit history. Now, for a lot of students, you might not have ever borrowed anything before. No credit cards, no loans, no car finance. So your credit history would be non-existent, but you can still have a good credit score. Your credit score is based on things like address history. Maybe you lived at your parents' house for 18 years, your uni house for 3 years. You could go onto your credit file and ensure that these records are up to date. If you do have any outstanding credit, like credit cards, loans, or car finance, ensure that they're paid back on time. What happens is that your credit history builds up with your credit score because it will show that you've made a payment on time each time. And then as a result, you'll have a better credit score. A better credit score means that you're more likely to be accepted by a mortgage lender. Hopefully that makes sense.
That's perfect and leads nicely into the next question, which is, I'm really far into my overdraft. Is this going to affect my prospect of being able to ever buy a house?
Your overdraft is like revolving credit, right? So it's not like a predetermined, you need to pay £400 a month. Your overdraft, so long as you're in your arranged overdraft with your lender, let's say it's a £500 overdraft and you're sitting at 300, you'll pay the cost of having that overdraft. If it stays at the 300, it doesn't count as a missed payment. If you are in the overdraft constantly, it can have a negative impact on your credit score. But the key thing is that it won't have a lasting impact, like a 6-year impact. It's not as serious as a CCJ or a default. So what happens is that at some point, if you can, try and pay more to get out of that overdraft. When you are out of that overdraft, it will reflect on your credit file and then improve your credit score quite quickly, not the 6-year wait that you might have to wait for other things like a CCJ.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Very clear answer. This is very helpful for me. I'm taking notes here. So the next question we had is, do you think that home ownership is on the out? Will young people just rent forever?
I don't think so. The reason why I don't think so is that the UK, in comparison to other European countries, loves home ownership. There's certain countries in Europe that they just rent. It doesn't even cross their mind. However, I feel that home ownership is embedded in British culture. It's like we want to buy a home and we don't even know why. It's just something that you do. It's buy a home, go to uni, get married, have kids. There might be some cases where you don't do one or two of those, but generally speaking, that's what happens in the UK. And as a result, I don't think it's dying out. And I think it's going to be incredibly harder, but we are still seeing that hundreds of thousands of first-time buyers are successful each year. So I will say that I don't think it's dying out anytime soon. I think people are finding new ways to do it. There is stats showing that over 50% of first-time buyers are buying with someone. So that's a really interesting fact because now they're using that to get on the property ladder. So I think that people will innovate before it dies out.
Do you agree with that, Filipa?
Yes, I'm very much agree with Tayo. I think it's interesting. Some time ago, I went to Switzerland to visit university, and I was talking to one of the professors, and I just assumed he owned his house. And he said, in Switzerland, it's not like the UK. People don't have an innate right to own a home. It's nobody owns a home. Everyone is renting. And the houses are all owned by pension funds, and so everyone is renting. But I do think there will always be this aspiration, and people will find a way. But it's becoming very hard. You can rely on help from your parents, but if you can't, then it's very difficult. So I'm hoping you see some policies like the stamp duty surcharge. I don't think that's large enough, But you see the Labour government now trying to increase the supply of housing. And I hope that this will go in the direction of easing the constraints a bit for young people to get on the property ladder.
We'll just do one final, no silly question then. Do you think rent will ever be capped in the UK? So presume this means there would be a limit on how much you could ever pay for rent. Could you ever see this coming true in the UK?
I think it's got a lot to do with policy, and I'm sure Philippa will have more insights than me on this one. I've done a little reading on it, and I think the UK has looked at other countries that have implemented it and the impacts. And as far as I can tell, it's not something that the UK is keen on implementing as of now. I guess rent caps can work on public buildings or buildings built by councils, but there's so much private ownership in the UK at the moment to get every private owner to implement a rent cap might be difficult.
Over to you, Philippa. What do you think on that one?
I don't think it's going to happen. Yes, like Tayo says, it will happen in terms of local authority ownership, council homes. But in terms of private ownership, no, I don't think. The UK is very much free market in a lot of different ways. And that would deviate quite dramatically from this free market view. And it may actually backfire. If you are an investor thinking, is it worthwhile building the property? If you put a cap on rents, you are basically capping the return that landlords can get. So you make it less attractive for people to buy to let. And so that's going to restrict the supply of rental housing. I know in principle it sounds like a great idea, but it distorts incentives on the supply side. So it could backfire. But I don't think it's going to happen anyway. It doesn't fit in a free market way of doing things.
We're just going to move on to a little section because you might be feeling a bit negative, listeners. If you're listening now, you might think, I've got no shot of this. I've got a terrible credit score. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm never going to be able to live that dream of buying my house. So perhaps if you could go back now, Tayo, and talk to the 23-year-old version of yourself and give them some practical advice, what would you be saying to them? What should people be doing in the UK to help themselves for the future?
I often say that our whole platform is built on the fact that we believe that education can bridge that gap where finance isn't included. You don't know what you don't know. So the first thing I'd say is always speak to a mortgage broker. No matter what stage you're at, find out how much you can afford. You may know that the home that you want is 250,000. You don't know what you can afford today. So you need to find it out so you know what you can work towards. If you don't find that out, you don't know how much you need to save. You don't know how much you need to earn. And you will just keep on listening to people saying buying property is hard. And you'll find that you just don't do anything. And then you might decide to do something 10 years later when property prices have increased by then. Look into it, find out how much you can afford. The other thing is just try and learn more. Social media is a great place because you curate your own timelines. If you follow pages like Bricks with Tips, you will always get information on home ownership, learn things about new schemes, new areas that are affordable, new products from lenders, new incentives from home builders. There's so many different things. You might not know that there's 5% available, there's 1% available, there's lenders that do 0%. There's lenders that will give you an extra 5% if you work for the NHS. There's lenders that will give you an extra 5% if you buy a new build. Like, loads of these different things you need to know, basically. If you can, I understand that not everybody has the privilege to live at their parents' home, but if you can, take advantage of the fact that you can live in your parents' home and save. Buying your own home gets incredibly harder when you're renting because you're paying rent at the same time and trying to save and buy. Philippa made a good point. Once you're on the ladder, it becomes a lot easier because you've got a home and you're paying down that mortgage. When people move into a bigger home, they may never have to save a deposit ever again. I always tell first-time buyers, you're up against people that have got equity, so they don't actually have to save a deposit. Whereas if you're renting and trying to save, it's incredibly difficult. If you can, try and stay at home. The other thing I'd say is take advantage of a lifetime ISA if you know you want to buy. A lifetime ISA is a government scheme where it's an ISA that you can put up to £4,000 in it per tax year, and the government will give you a 25% cash bonus. Bear in mind, it can only be used to buy a home or for retirement. My final point would be on your saving strategy. Sometimes we can get caught up, especially coming out of university, speaking from experience. Sometimes you start building up all of these bills that you don't actually need. I flipped it on its head. When I came out of university, I said, you know what, I'm going to save for a home and everything that's left, I'm going to spend. But because I'd saved for a home, I was comfortable spending on, if there was £500 left and I wanted to spend it all on one shoe, not a pair of shoes, just one of them, I would do that basically because I know that I felt good in knowing that I've saved a good chunk for the home basically. So save first and then spend the rest.
You know what? I've got a cheeky question while I've got you, Tayo, because this is something that's been on my mind and it might be on some of the listeners. Because I have a Help to Buy ISA. And it's one that doesn't exist anymore. I think it was one that started a few years ago and I got it at the time and I'm still putting money into it. And is that the same as a lifetime ISA or are they different?
They're very different. They have different benefits. Help to Buy ISA can still be used, so it's still good. You just can't open a new one. I'd look into lifetime ISA as well. Generally speaking, the lifetime ISA offering was better. So you can look into it and consider that as well. Also, consider instant access savings accounts if you have exhausted in either of those licenses.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we're on to our final section now, and this is our 2-minute takeaway. And this is where we just put 2 minutes on the clock, put Philippa on the spot, and we ask her to just quickly give us a little summary, a wrap up of an area of her research that she thinks is really important for us to know. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock now. I'll let you take it away.
So I'm going to talk about my research on the effect of foreign investment on house prices. I look across small areas, local authorities in England and Wales, and I look at the effect of foreign investment on UK property, on house prices and affordability. What I find is that in areas where there is more foreign investment, you see a higher increase in house prices. So there is a positive effect of foreign investment on prices. I use econometric techniques to account for endogeneity. I use these shocks abroad, the political conditions abroad, as a shock that exogenously changes foreign investment in the UK. And what I see is that this positive effect on prices doesn't just happen for very expensive homes. So this isn't just the price of mansions that goes up, but it affects the whole distribution of house prices. So it would affect the price of the medium home and lower price homes as well. So it affects the whole distribution of prices. And I also test whether foreign investment increases the construction of new homes, because we have to look at the interaction between demand and supply. If we see that an increase in demand is met by an equal increase in supply, then we wouldn't expect prices to change very much. What I find is that there is no significant effect on the construction of new homes. You see foreign investment coming in, there is no corresponding increase in the construction of new homes, and so you see an increase in prices. Was that 2 minutes?
That was pretty much bang on. Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. I don't want to use any more of your time, other than just to thank you both so much for sharing your expertise with our listeners. This is a brand new podcast. Keep on listening to our future episodes. We're going to be debunking lots of different big topics in a simple way. Where can people find out more about your research, your work? I'm a big follower of Bricks with Tips, so I highly recommend it. Tayo, plug yourself. Let people know where to follow for some housing advice.
Absolutely. So follow us on Bricks with Tips on all platforms, from LinkedIn to TikTok to Twitter to Instagram to YouTube. That's BRICKZ WITHTIPZ. You can also go on our website to make inquiries. We cover all things property and finance, and just trying to keep you guys engaged and informed.
Perfect. And we'll definitely be tagging you in this episode and everything. Listeners, go and have a look at the comments and follow along with Bricks with Tips. Dr. Filipa, your research is published all over. Is there anywhere that you'd like people to find you in particular?
I'm not really that active on social media. I have a LinkedIn page and a Google site where you can find all my research papers and work in progress, the ones that haven't been published yet. So that would be on my Google site.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I can't thank you enough for being part of Office Hours. Follow us along and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.